Good afternoon. I apologize for that. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for the ABPMP CBOC review of Chapter 6, which is Process Performance Management. And my name is Dan Morris. I'll be the moderator today. I've been with ABPMP since about 2005. In that time, I've served on the Chicago board and the international board. And most recently, I led the rewrite of the CBOC, which is what we'll be reviewing today. This is part of a series of webinars, one per month, where we go through with the author each of the chapters in the CBOC. Now, the CBOC itself was a major effort for ABPMP. It involved over 25 people working collaboratively as authors and reviewers. Through that process, everything in the CBOC has been carefully vetted and represents the collaborative ideas and experiences of a wide range of authors with different perspectives and different experiences. This is the 6th in the monthly series that we've been putting on, and today we'll be essentially looking at process performance management. And before we move further, though, I'd like to just take a second and do a little housekeeping. First of all, we'll be looking at a combination of questions that we'll answer during the presentation itself. If you key them in, we'll look at them at the end of each slide. For those that you think of a little later, we'll be also answering questions at the end of the session today. Please keep your phone on mute. And the other thing here is that this session is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to review it or have colleagues review it through the ABPMP website. Now, this chapter was written as most collaboratively. The authors of this chapter, first of all, are Raju Saxena, who will be the presenter today, Jose Furlan, and myself. Jose is the head of the Brazilian chapter of ABPMP. Our presenter, Raju, is a senior manager with Ernst & Young in their advisory service practices. He has 22 years of experience in business process management, business rules management, enterprise content management, and business intelligence. His implementations include enterprise BPM solutions across multiple continents and languages, with reconciliation solutions that support over 60 million transactions a day. So he's worked on some pretty large projects. He's also, as all the authors, he has earned his CBTP certification. He also has a BS in accounting from Canisius College. He, in addition to being a co-author in the Common Body of Knowledge, he's been a speaker at FXOCX's BPM and Technology Innovation Forum and Expo, and he is co-author of a paper called The Need for a BPM Center of Excellence. On the personal side,
naturally, the other co-author is you. It was you and me together.
I know. Which is a nice segue into the end of my little talk here, which I've known Raju for about 5 years, 6 years, and we've published together and we've worked together. I've always found him to be highly knowledgeable on business transformation and improvement, and bringing a perspective that blends business-focused redesign with both legacy as well as BPMS technologies. So at this point, I'd like to turn the session over to Raju, and for those who would like a little bit more information on Raju, you can certainly take a look at his bio. It'll be online at the ABPMP website. And some contact information will be on the last slide. So if you have any questions following the presentation, please write Raju, and he'll be happy to answer them. Okay, Raju, at this point, turn it over to you.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. So I appreciate everyone participating in this conversation. I think this is a very exciting chapter like the others. I think there's a lot of good content here. Naturally, trying to cover the entire chapter would be impossible considering it's so long. But you can see it's pretty extensive when it comes to the aspect of process performance management maturity, methodology approach, and it gets pretty deep into metrics. The areas that I'll focus on from my perspective is, key outlining the aspects of process performance management, understanding the maturity model. I think that's very critical in organizations where they're trying to get to the next level or understand, what is the next level, where are they in the process. So we're going to spend some time going through the maturity model. We'll talk about measurements. I also want to talk about a couple topics around, if you're having your first performance management meeting, first workshop, what are the things you should be considering? So we want to outline that, and then we want to wrap up with some success considerations. So you can see from here some of the sort of key questions the chapter covers is, what is process versus workflow? How is it measured? What is the difference between effectiveness and efficiency of a process, and what's the right perspective when it comes to that? What are the right people to engage and support in the process? And how is that aligned to your probably existing enterprise reporting solution or capability? So as I mentioned when I started, the process performance management is a critical step in the life cycle around BPM. It's absolutely a critical factor because of the aspect of it quantifies, tracks, and verifies what you're doing, your ability to achieve goals, and your ability to be successful. So I was actually very excited to work with Dan and others to sort of package this chapter and put our knowledge into it. So it was a very exciting experience. Okay, so I'm going to flip over periodically and see if there's any questions. Looks like there's no questions so far. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So I do want to introduce also the David McCoy, who was actually he wrote the foreword to the chapter. And David, again, a great guy, wealth of experience. He started in the Big Six, which is actually years ago before the consolidation. He also is a key leader at Gartner around BPM, business activity monitoring, and other topics. Naturally, he was one of the initial thought leaders around business activity monitoring, which is critical to this chapter, around how do you, from a real-time perspective, track what you're doing and ensure that you're hitting your goals on a daily basis. Because naturally, goals, they don't get slipped monthly, yearly. They get slipped by the way you manage your work on a daily basis. He also has a lot of perspective around BAM methodology and approach. And in his forward, he had a couple of key points which I felt were really important. First of all, BAM is critical. That's absolutely true when it comes to BPM, and especially when you get into BPM technology, where a lot of these higher end technologies have not only the ability to diagram and execute process, but track at a very finite granular level how those processes are performing, and it allows you to very critically understand how you can continually improve what you're doing and improve the process itself. So you identify areas of BAM ability to capture, filter, and analyze data in order to understand process, key metrics, and measures. So a couple of points he made is make sure that you have broad focus, because naturally, as we all understand BPM is, ideally from a process standpoint, is looking horizontally across organizations, not within siloed organizations. So having that broad focus, that end-to-end view is extremely important. And also make sure you have a view on the value of what you're going to be working on, plus based on the scope. And always starting from a business view versus technology, because naturally we're trying to engage clients in providing services, and he definitely identified the aspects of client satisfaction, and it's important to have that perspective. And then also the aspect of moving from being reactive to being proactive. And actually this chapter and the contents goes through some aspects of how do you move in the direction of being mature enough to be proactive and having the aspects of continuous improvement. Okay, so I'm going to check if there's any questions. Looks like no questions so far, so I'm going to continue through. So the topics I plan to cover in the next hour or so is spending time actually on the maturity model, because from my experience in engaging clients and understanding how they can improve the way they operate or their capabilities around BPM, it's obviously important to have a tool like a maturity model to understand where to start and how do you progress. Then I'll talk about key aspects of measurement and management. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, how do you approach your first process performance workshop, and some of the key aspects of dependencies and how do you want to keep conversations in it, which is also covered in the book, and also, again, the success considerations. Okay. All right, so going to the overview, as you can look at the graphic on the right side, the key aspect is organizations, the way they're defined is absolutely hierarchical, and they're siloed in nature. From when ABPMP defines process, they're saying what is the cross-organizational view of a process. So not from a siloed view of if you're calling to a customer calls into a bank and wants to transfer funds. It's not the aspect of the back office execution of the funds transfer, but really it's the holistic view of the customer calling in, they hit the IVR, they qualify themselves, they talk to a rep, the rep goes through their steps in their process, that steps, once even the call is done, executes further in the middle office or back office, all the way through resolution. So when we say process view, we're looking cross-organization, versus workflow is really the detail of within each siloed organization, what are the actual activities, rules, system, and data that support the execution. So you can think of the process is composed of a lot of different individual workflows. So from a business process performance standpoint, when we're looking at process along with workflow, we want to make sure we have the horizontal view, because the way you can really understand the client's experience and the experience of your own performance relative to the products that are offered, you have to really understand from a horizontal standpoint. It's also critical to understand process control. So how is work moving? Is it consistent? Is the right level of quality, and the rules, are they consistent in nature? I've seen clients where because the process view is simply not there, they're really organizationally focused, and they're exposing functionality to clients, be it an online view or through the IVR or talking to a rep. Unfortunately, the way they service that client, the behavior changes because the rules and the process is not a single consistent executable. It's segmented by the channel they're coming in and segmented by different technologies. So from a BPM standpoint, and along with the aspect of performance management, exposing those situations where there's differences and make sure they're consistent is extremely critical to any organizational success. Because naturally, you wouldn't want a client doing, creating an account and all of a sudden getting different interest rates based on the way they created the account. That would just be, that would not be a good client experience. The next point is the aspect of having a 360 view. So when we say 360 view and you're defining a process from beginning to end, as we've been discussing, it's really not just saying, okay, from a client standpoint, what are the activities that need to be performed, but also engaging the other organizations and saying, well, what is the internal customers and process? What is the tax and audit perspective on this process? Because naturally, especially in banking, there's been a lot of regulation added, Well, the aspect of legal compliance and audit, their view on that process and including those perspectives, and then adding on the aspect of performance management to it will absolutely make sure that the complete perspective is there, and the metrics they're generating can answer the different views that be required and ensure that you can be successful not only for your clients but any reporting bodies that you have. Then there's the aspect of efficiency versus effectiveness. So a lot of times when organizations get involved with trying to re-engineer their processes, they're focusing on the timelines and how long does it take to execute the process. The key is you need to step back and not just think about reducing the execution time, but understanding how effective is this. So if you can actually create a process, if you thought purely on efficiency, and you think about creating a bank account, a customer coming in and creating an account for themselves, be it savings or checking or anything else. If you look at purely at time, you can define a process that basically tells the customer that, well, if you didn't have all your documentation when you came in, you have to go home, get the documentation, come back. Well, the fact is that wasn't really effective because the client may never come back. So having the perspective of saying, is this process effective? Am I gathering the right information? Am I giving the client the right level of flexibility? And then on top of that, how can I be more efficient in executing that process for a client? And naturally the efficiency of creating an account may take days in some situations, and optimizing it down to hours or minutes is what the clients are looking for and their expectations are. And the last point on the overview is the aspects of the maturity model. So I'm going to move to that next. Let me see if there's any questions so far. Nope. Okay, so let's go to the maturity model. So as I mentioned earlier, the maturity model and having a maturity model is extremely important, not only for people like myself that are consultants and helping clients move to the next level of maturity or understanding or capability around BPM or other sort of capabilities that they have, but even for organizations for themselves to understand, where do I fit? Where do I stand when it comes to my level of maturity, so that then I can assess what's next. And it's probably very important to also recognize that when you talk about maturity, a single organization or a company will have probably different levels of maturity across your silos, because traditionally organizations are silo based, and each organization may choose to drive certain types of investment, which may get to the next level of maturity, while the other silo organizations are not there. So defining this framework and naturally leveraging probably industry standard models, which are more defensible, should be used to help you understand where do you stand. And when I talk to my clients, that's one of the first conversations I have is, okay, you want to make sure you want to improve the way that you're reporting or the metrics that you have or the transparency you have with a process. Well, let's clearly understand where you are today, because I can't help you unless I know where you are today. Once I understand where you are and I understand where you are from a maturity standpoint, I'm not going to jump you 3 levels ahead, because that'd be a significant investment and risk. But let's develop a roadmap together where we take incremental steps going through the maturity cycle so that you can effectively develop the skills you want and develop the right level of competency you're looking to build. It's also very important to understand from a leadership standpoint, once you have a maturity model, it's how far do you really want to go? Because naturally, every step in maturity has some level of resource investment, cost, technology investment. It's very important to understand and get guidance from leadership as to how far do you want to go, to what level of maturity is going to be effective for our organization based on what we're interested in doing and the type of clients we have. So that's why this maturity model. I'm sorry, Dan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think that when we start to look at maturity models and where companies are going to be, it's a lot of times what we see as mixed modeling as a direction, because in some areas of the company they'll want to be more mature, especially where you're dealing with more difficult type things, and in others where they're just really getting started, you really don't need that level. So your investment really should be essentially aligned to those parts of the organization where you're being more aggressive in your use of the technologies and in your application of BPM itself.
That's an excellent point, Dan. Thank you. Now, there's different drivers why companies get onto this sort of cycle of maturity. It could be like in banking, there's a lot of regulations. All of a sudden, there's significant investment in understanding what they're doing from a reporting and metric standpoint and tracking. So sometimes that drives it. There's been a lot of interest from clients to look at the client or customer experience and understand from that standpoint, how can they improve to increase their market share or reduce costs or improve efficiency so that they can provide both a better service to the client along with making more efficient or improve margins for the company itself. Okay, we'll check if there's any questions. Nope. Okay, so now we're going to do, because I think it's critically important to understand each level in the maturity cycle and how they distinguish themselves. And again, it's important to know that companies, not only are they going to have organizations with different level of maturity, but based on the type of maturity, so there could be process maturity, and in this case there's two dimensions, of process and metrics. Both those could vary even by department. And so it's important to understand what the levels are and hopefully they'll actually help you understand potentially as you're listening to this conversation where you feel your organization is or your company is, and where do you want to go next, or what do you want to achieve strategically. So starting with level 0, now naturally BPM has matured significantly over the last 15, 20 years or so, and the aspect of having no understanding of process or very limited understanding of process, along with very siloed view of process improvement. There's probably very few, at least from a financial service standpoint, which is my focus at Ernst & Young, there's very few organizations that are at that level. They've sort of matured beyond that because naturally, the aspect of BPM is really catching on. And even, BPM technology is very matured where I see organizations, especially large organizations, have many different tools that they're leveraging in order to understand their process. So level 0 is really the aspect of, okay, from a process, and as we defined process earlier, is a horizontal view of the execution of requests or interactions with clients. And from a performance standpoint, because it's very isolated by organization, there is some aspect of process or metrics when you look at improvement within the silo. But the fact is there's some attempts at improving metrics, but it's challenging because you don't have the holistic view. So organizationally, it's or a business unit, they have either they're not fully aware of the concept of process, or if they are, they look at it from a very simplistic standpoint of steps within a business unit. And what's also important when you get, especially around BPM and also the aspect of performance monitoring, there's understanding the definitions and aligning those definitions is something you have to achieve from a maturity standpoint, and having the whole organization understand those definitions is a step in the maturity cycle. So when you're at level 0, the whole aspect of, what is the definition of process, what's the definition of, the type of metrics you want to measure is either differences of opinion or it's not really well understood. Also, there's a distinction of how process improvement is executed within siloed organizations. Performance processes, the post-monitoring is probably either unknown or there's very limited capability of actually doing true end-to-end monitoring. Because naturally, as we all understand, when we have organizations with a lot of legacy technology, be able to hook those technologies together from a process execution standpoint is absolutely a challenge. So at this level of maturity, you don't have the right tools or technologies to try to bring those technologies together and create a holistic view. So measurement is really at a really basic level, and it's not proactive at all. It's absolutely at a looking back perspective or looking at trends. Clearly, because they're siloed organizations, there's little knowledge of a holistic process. And measurement is more at the business unit event level, and it's not really thinking holistically. So reporting itself is very limited based on the data sources that can be combined together.
Okay, Raju, this is Dan.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions on this slide at this point. First of all, from Fernando Rodriguez. Raju, here in Europe, or can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, here in Europe, this is from Fernando Rodriguez. Here in Europe, organizations like balanced scorecard. The problem is, how can we help to align KPIs with PPIs?
Yeah, so
that's
the first question. Do you want me to answer that first, or is there an extension?
Please. No, please answer.
Yeah, so what I would suggest, because that's probably a longer answer than I probably want to cover in this call. I think it's a very important question. What I would suggest to get the right answer is reaching out to me. I'm happy to convey in more detail how you would actually do that. But I think for this conversation, I'd like to sort of skip that question for now.
Okay, we have from Fokino, and please forgive me for killing your name here. Fokio Oken Amidis. How can top management be convinced to move from low maturity levels to high maturity levels when management views this as a long-term investment with small impact on the short-term financial performance and little effect on managers' evaluation?
Yeah, so I think that's an important question, and it's actually a challenge in many organizations where it's not clearly understood what BPM is, and it's more importantly key metrics that you want to execute across a process. So I've written many business cases trying to help clients understand the true value of understanding how they're executing work and how that affects clients and how that improves your margin, but also improves the way you retain customers in this very competitive environment. So it's really the way you have to convince leadership is providing a roadmap. Yes, it's 100% going to take multi-year, but what are the incremental steps you're going to take on a quarterly or semi-annual, annual basis that not only going to achieve certain goals, but how does that directly affect your ability to make decisions and your ability to affect the way clients improve their experience, and how that directly impacts not only retention, but value to the organization directly. So that's the quick answer. Again, I'm happy to have a more extensive conversation offline. Dan, any other questions?
Those are the two questions that were raised.
Okay, excellent. All right, so then naturally the next maturity level is ad hoc, which is actually it's occasional, not consistent, not planned, it's disorganized. So the difference between the last maturity level and here is that there's still an aspect of isolation, but the key is there's a growing understanding of what process is. So there's a maturity from when you define process, you're not thinking of siloed environments anymore. There's now awareness, but now with awareness becomes challenge. So now you're at ad hoc, and individuals are now saying, oh, a process, now I understand the horizontal execution of it. But now it seems like a huge effort to say, well, if I want to understand all my processes, it's going to be a lot of work. So that becomes a limiting factor, and getting over that hurdle is something you have to work on to get to the next level of maturity. Also, there's a recognition, because now there's a view horizontally, that there's inconsistent processes and varying results when it comes to either customer experience or execution of a process. So that also drives the need of understanding more some level of investment to move to next level of maturity and the value associated with doing that. There's many methodologies like Lean and Six Sigma that are being used with some benefit, but they're actually, the investment itself is still siloed into very specific business units or core processes. So it's still not thought of as holistic. That's the key. It's at this maturity level, there's knowledge and awareness, but you're not extending yourself to all the business areas and looking truly horizontally. You're still looking from a unit standpoint. The performance management is more associated with quality issues and, again, siloed business unit cost reduction and staff reduction. It's not, again, looking at better organization and efficiency outside of removing individuals. Performance is a goal for many managers, but not all. So, there's not that, again, holistic view that, what are the key performance metrics and how do we manage them at an enterprise level. You do have some managers at this maturity that are looking cross-functional and using process models, but those models, again, they're probably varying in nature. They're being independently by managers that believe in or understand what needs to be done in order to better manage their environment. So there's lack of consistency, and there's a lack of consistency in metrics. And because it's still siloed, the fact is the metrics are still not holistic. So there's no ability to look sort of horizontally from an executive level. It's still siloed business units. Also, it's also understand that from a measurement capability standpoint, a lot of work is still in legacy technology, which requires significant manual activity to try to gather data out of them. So it still becomes a difficult task in trying to get data out of these technologies, and actually requires investment. So at this level, you don't have the coordination, you don't have the investment from leadership. There's not the sort of knowledge from leadership of how to do it better. So at this point, you're still sort of struggling in siloed environments to try to make it work. Okay. Looks like there's still 2 questions. I'm not sure if they're old questions, Dan, or they're new ones.
Old ones, Raju. You've addressed those.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Now you're getting the repeatable process. So now all of a sudden you're moving to a point where there's a better understanding of process, but it's not coordinated. So more of the organizations are becoming aware of process. They're trying to work together at a lower level to gain an end-to-end view, but most of it is still localized. It's not well coordinated. So you have the aspect of managers trying to define KPIs and looking to their peers to work with them on getting that holistic view. There's the exposure that business rules and the consistency of them is extremely important, because the fact is because you have siloed environments and siloed technology, you have also the redundancy from a maintenance standpoint and management standpoint of every time a policy changes or a regulation changes, that those separate isolated technologies and organizations have to make redundant investment in order to make changes to meet certain expectations. So processes are still not defined completely. They're not always accurately documented. The tools that are being used are still simplistic, and naturally each organization probably has their own, so they're not coordinated in nature. And there's limited work in these process models. They're not getting to the level of detail, and they're not thinking holistically around, as I mentioned earlier, the 360 view. So they're more specifically thinking about these are steps within my process, potentially what are the inputs from the other organizations around me, but they're not as mature as they need to be. So some of the metrics, because by technology limitations, are still manual in nature, looking for quality and trying to understand, process execution time. So isolated systems, there's some level of improvement because now you have some managers working together to understand more completely what's going on. But again, because roles are not well defined, there's not executive support, it's not completely there. So there's a lot of natural custom programming that's required to make some of this work. Okay, looks like there's no questions, so I'm going to proceed. So defined, so now you're at the level where performance management is now starting to be formalized, but measurement from a granularity standpoint is still not there. So you're still looking from a granularity standpoint, you're looking particularly at your process probably from a high level. It's still not looking at from a 360 view, but the key is there's some aspect of leadership engagement, and they're trying to coordinate some of the work that's being done across the organization to provide some sort of formalization or consistency approach that's taken across the individual management or the horizontals. So not all processes are fine. There is now all of a sudden a BPM tool in place. Now, if you're looking at the process performance management, there's aspect of BPM tools which naturally add a great deal of value. But if you're looking at purely metrics, there's also BAM tools out there, business activity monitors, that can hook into your process that also can pull out and start giving you those metrics. So BPM is obviously a stronger capability to get the appropriate process and 360 view and metrics in place. But naturally, there are other ways of doing that may be incrementally more cost effective just to get the ball rolling, and probably a little smaller investment, but the key is getting it rolling in the right direction. So now processes at this level are becoming much more visible across the organization. Management understands the cross-functional view of processes and sees the value of knowing what they are and their ability to make decisions that affects the overall process and the experience, be it internal consumers or external consumers. And there's naturally now all of a sudden better coordination. So, I've seen organizations, because they went from isolated views of what they're trying to execute and support a client to horizontal views of process, and all of a sudden they realize that through this level of maturity that they, from an organizational standpoint, have a lot of redundancy. So let's say from a clients come in and they have different mechanisms of consuming data, or consuming content. So you're creating a checking account and you need your driver's license, so you go to a branch and they scan it in, but if they don't have their driver's license, maybe you give them a piece of paper so they can fax it in. Well, what happens is all of a sudden there's multiple organizations that are doing document consumption in silos based on product or the way the company is organized. So there's redundant work and redundant activity, redundant organizations that all of a sudden now the company's understanding by this level of maturity that they can break them down and bring them together and make it more effective. So because now you have a BPMS tool, the processes are more holistically viewed, and you're starting to get the right level of metrics and reporting that you're looking for. Okay, looks like no questions. Okay, level 4. So the distinction between level 4 and really looking at the level 5 is that level 4 is you're to the right level of maturity and consistently across the organization as to how you're documenting and managing processes. And you've now formalized it with process owners from a matrix view standpoint. You have the right governance organization, so you probably have a chief process officer that's trying to understand processes and manage them and working at improving them. You centralize some aspect of probably your BPMS development and execution. the key distinction here and the next level of maturity is the aspect of continuous improvement and also being more proactive. So at maturity level 4, you're getting your real-time dashboards, you're starting to get trend reports, you're starting to fill in your scorecards, but you're not to the point of be able to project out and be able to start sort of look forward and make effective decisions. You start getting into inference engines and understanding how to make better decisions, but the aspect of continuous improvement hasn't been achieved yet. Okay, so that covers also maturity level 5. I sort of combine them together. So I'm going to skip over that one. Okay, and then let's talk about measurement and management. So from a process performance measurement standpoint, what's the value, right? A lot of what we've been talking about is really the process understanding, understanding key metrics, getting agreement across the organization on what are those metrics and how do you measure them, the acceptance that performance and measurement are extremely critical across the organization, getting the right level of investment. All of a sudden now you're exposing data that was difficult to expose before, and which allows you to make better decisions and be able to better predict issues and solve problems. And also the flexibility of building reporting that is able to give you the views from be it executive or middle management or a line manager. So it's really pushing you to the right level. One of the key factors to make sure that you'll be successful from a measurement standpoint is make sure there's a consistent business objective, because naturally there's going to be difference of opinions. So having a single view is going to be very important. The aspect of value drivers or outcomes. So as you're defining key metrics, what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? What are the particular goals we're trying to achieve? And based on those goals, naturally you can't hit every single metric. What are the key metrics? Some level of prioritization, and then based on that prioritization and understanding maturity, so the initial metrics you define, as you get some control over them, then you can start forecasting out what's the next set of metrics around you and what are the next challenges.
All right, sure, this is Dan.
Go ahead, Dan.
If I might add just a couple of things to that.
Oh, please,
One of the big problems in measurement really deals with change management, where people historically have not been measured, at least not very closely. A move to measure performance will often be met with, we'll say, hostility. And so a change management program at the front becomes very important. The other thing is, at least from my perspective, the KPI itself, at least initially, is of secondary importance. The primary driver is getting people to agree on what will be measured and how it will be measured. The formulas are really where a lot of the politics live. Then the targets can be adjusted over time as you learn more the KPIs. But getting everyone to agree on what you're going to measure, how you're going to measure it, where you're going to get the data becomes absolutely critical if you want people to accept the results. I'll turn it back to you, Raju.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so if there's no question, I'm going to proceed on. So the next slide really covers some of the considerations as you're going through this journey. And I'm going to try to summarize this for the sake of time and just in case there's questions at the end. So the considerations as you get into this journey is the aspect, okay, well, more information is better. The key is let's focus. Let's think about incremental wins and continuous improvement. Think about the bottom line versus focusing on process time, errors, resolution, continuous improvement. And naturally, the aspect of the bottom line will come out as a secondary value, but unless you have control over how the process is being executed and how issues are being managed, you're not going to get the real value. Controlling process, it's really prioritizing and getting focus on key processes, understanding how to normalize them and move them to the next level of maturity. And then finally, try to use all relevant indicators. Again, it's trying to manage how much work you can do. I've seen too many organizations that try to do a big bang approach. Naturally, from a BPM framework standpoint, you have to understand what are the incremental chunks, just like the maturity model, of what you can do now, the value you're going to gain, and get those ROIs defined very clearly, so that, first of all, you can convince leadership, but secondly, you can incrementally see improvement to your organization. And as you incrementally see improvement, you gain knowledge, and you can make the next step more effectively as to what to focus on and what are the next key set of metrics. Okay, the next slide is talking about different methods in which you can assess process performance. And the three methods that were defined in the chapter were value stream mapping, activity-based costing, and then statistical process control. So starting with the value stream mapping, as you can see on the right, there's the aspect of over 7. You're looking at it from what are the challenges or issues that I may have in my process, and then assessing the process based on those issues, be it wait times, being people not being productive, or the aspect of when work is moved, is it physical or is it logical, and the efficiencies around it, understanding defects and inventory, which also relate to the overproduction, and so make sure that work is executed on a timely basis and work is queued up correctly, so you're not backing up. Over-processing, which is doing the non-value added activities. Maybe, as an example, the aspects of access reviews or approvals. So doing some level of risk-based assessment, saying that can we, instead of doing access amount of reviews or verification, can we take on some risk and be more effective? And understanding where those points in the process to try to resolve them. And then motion, which is more poorly organized processes. So aspect of work moving between organizations, as I mentioned earlier, around document consumption, the redundancy of process. Activity-based costing, which is the one that I'm most familiar with because of my accounting background, and actually activity-based costing is in most modeling tools and simulation modeling tools is the method that's used. So from that standpoint, which you're modeling out or defining what are the steps in the process, and for each step in the process, what is the actual resource load and cost. So not only you're understanding as you execute the process for every transaction with the cost associated with it, but you also, based on your throttling of that process, what's your capacity, which is also important, and where you're bottlenecking. So that's where the key values of simulation modeling come into place. The statistical process control is really looking from an analytical standpoint of your processes and their performance, and trying to flush out by interpreting that data, where your key issues. So for example, if you look at work completion rates, so how is work statistically being completed on a daily basis, and as you see anomalies, you can evaluate that and drill down and see where the anomalies occurred and try to resolve them. So all three have their own individual values. It's probably not taking one approach, it's probably taking a blend of the three approaches that's probably most effective, and make sure that you're actually exposing and trying to learn about your process and being effective in solving issues. Okay, I see one question.
And the question is from Fokian, and isn't tempting to declare less than actual cost, less than hours, in activity-based costing to make profit of a department appear higher? Isn't it tempting to declare less than actual cost?
You're absolutely, yeah. So here's the challenge. You're absolutely right. So when and this is a reason why you want to build some sort of independent governance organization around process improvement. Because if you allow individual managers within their silos to define and run simulations of their own particular steps in the process, they have that ability to manipulate the process. Not that people would, but they could. So having a independence, be it a BPM COE or a chief operating officer or different sort of governance models that you can create, ideally you have some independent organizations that's documenting, managing those processes and providing the right perspective on how to make efficient changes, and then engaging the manager leaders in individual departments to talk about next steps.
Yeah, I'd also like to add, I've seen this happen in a lot of different places with overestimation on benefit, and sooner or later everybody has to fess up and be honest, and at some point in time, we'll say those estimation problems are going to be coming to light, and a lot of organizations have real problems with not meeting the projected benefit, and so that's something you really need to watch out.
Okay, excellent. And looks like there's one more question around balanced scorecard. So I know for the sake of time, I'd be happy to take that one offline and answer that. So if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to answer the question around the BSC and the value of it. Okay, going to the next slide, which is talking about reporting methods and simulation modeling. Naturally, I think I covered some of this in previous slides, so I'm going to go over it pretty quickly so we can get to a couple more slides here. So from a reporting standpoint, actually there's multiple methods of reporting. There's dashboards, which is more real-time, which are leveraged by liner managers or middle management, and they have drill-down capabilities, versus scorecards, which are more batch-oriented. They're made for middle to executive management to ensure that critical metrics are being met by the organization. There's inference engines, which are tools or batch tools that sort of assess metrics and provide a perspective based on business rules on how to solve issues and being proactive. And then trending and forecasting, which is again, it's a batch process. Usually it's based on some data warehouse that looks forward and back to be able to understand where you've been and then project out where you potentially will be going. So you can make decisions from a leadership standpoint. Simulation modeling, which I know has been covered in probably other chapters, but it's a pet peeve of mine because I think there's significant value in running simulation modeling tools. But the aspect of cost reduction, because you're understanding the solution more effectively, how it's going to be executed in production, or the changes you're going to make. The audit effectiveness, so understanding controls. Cost reduction, which is really looking at, what are the opportunities that I have and how can I prioritize the opportunities to reduce overall cost. And revenue assessment, how do I better define this process so that I can increase my revenue and improve my margins. Production execution, again, simulation modeling, one of the core values is understanding if I were to change this process, how is it going to be actually executed in production? So that's one of the key values of simulation modeling. And then improve requirements because, again, you're getting an end-to-end view. Okay. The next slide is the aspect of the decision framework when you have a performance indicator that maybe is coming. You define a performance indicator and it seems like it's not accurate. How do you react to it and manage it? So I'll let you guys sort of read that offline for the sake of time, but it gives you a nice sort of outline as to let's not jump to conclusion. Let's understand where the data is coming from. How do you analyze it and make sure that it's effective in what's calculating? Naturally, as organizations are maturing and defining metrics, one of the more extensive parts is QAing those metrics, understanding what they're saying, how they're interpreted, and their accuracy of them. Okay, the process performance workshops. So just a couple of key points on this slide is, again, throughout the deck, gaining executive support, that's extremely critical. Having some inventory or view of, what is all the functions of our organization and inventory of processes, selecting the right areas to start, and also the right participants. So the only way you can get consensus and just sort of jumping to the challenges is by having the right people in the room and the participation. And the only way you can get them to participate is having executive leadership identifying this is extremely important and critical, and then make sure there's the right level of dedication and follow-up through the workshops in order to define the appropriate metrics for the organization. Okay, and then the final slide is considerations for success, and then we'll open up for any final questions. So competency matching, having the right skill sets. I can't tell you how many times when you define an organization that's trying to look at performance or metrics, unfortunately what happens is you try to look for available resources to help do the work, but they may not have the right skill set, so the outcome isn't clear, or the outcome is not successful. So it's extremely important to start out right with saying, who do we need, what are their competencies? Roles, responsibilities, so you have the boundaries defined as to what people are doing. Having, again, repeating the aspect of governance and executive support. And also with having the right governance and executive support, ensuring that the organization is defined that's going to do the work is empowered to make decisions. And then based on the metrics you're defining, and this goes back to Dan's comments about org change management, is actually changing the way compensation incentive is defined. So you can the metrics that are going to be now being managed on a regular basis are going to actually be viewed as important, and managers in the organization are trying to meet those particular goals because they're directly affected by it. So Michael Hammer had written a book on fast, cheaper, and better, and he had defined sort of 7 deadly sins for measurement, sort of entertaining in itself. So, but the key points you want to take is you want to make sure that you're looking from a customer perspective, not just an internal perspective. You want to make sure that you're measuring not just what's known, but understanding the holistic view of what needs to be done. Giving thought to the consequences of the metrics, not just define metrics and just sort of see what happens, so that you can be effective in executing them and they're being valued by the organization. And then also make sure that there's the right behavior, that people are on board, again, from a change management standpoint, they're going to support the work. Okay, so that's the end of the deck. Dan, any other final questions that you see?
No, could you move to the last slide, though, please?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, there we are. I would like to, first of all, I'd like to thank Raju for a great presentation, and a lot of very interesting concepts, a lot of good discussion. I think that I know that Raju would be happy to address any questions, not only that we had to defer today, but that may come up next week or even next month. His contact information is on this slide. If you don't have a chance to write it down now, it will also be in the slide deck that's on ABPMP's website. So please, take a look at that. And again, thank you. I'd like to invite everyone to join us in a month from now when we'll be looking at Chapter 7, which is process transformation. We are out of time, but I do see some thank yous. And Raju, thank you. And if there are no additional comments from anyone, I will close the session. Okay, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you, Raju.
Thank you.